New details about the lone attacker that killed 4 people and wounded many in a terrorist attack have came out. Now, according to CNN, this attacker has been named. It is British-born Khalid Masood. Now, again, you're gonna listen to that name. You're gonna be like, of course, Khalid Masood. Now, Masood is a 52-year-old, as I said, British-born native with past criminal convictions. Now, his criminal past basically includes assault and possession of weapons. So, obviously, quite a checkered past for this guy, but never any sort of instances of domestic terrorism. Just possession of weapons and assault. Now, Masood apparently had been inspired to do this attack by the Islamic State, but there were no direct ties. Now, among the injured in the attack, you had 12 Britons, 3 French school children, 2 Romanians, 4 South Koreans, 2 Greeks, 1 German, a Polish person, 1 Irish, 1 Chinese, 1 Italian, and 1 American. And among the dead is 1 Spaniard and 1 American. So there's what we know so far of the victims and of the attacker. Now, the assailant, of course, used a vehicle to run over as many people as possible, and then used a knife to kill one of the police officers. So that was one of the 4 deaths. So immediately you have parallels to Nice and Belgium. And of course, what happened yesterday was 1 year to the day of the attacks in Belgium. So likely this was inspired by the Belgium attacks. Now, and that's because it followed the same kind of MO, right? Using cars and knives and things that are easily obtainable and not exactly illegal to inflict maximum damage on civilians in order to get a lot of attention. And it has succeeded in that. It has gotten a lot of attention. Now, what we know here so far is that he acted alone. He wasn't actually acting in accordance to others. So it's a lone wolf type of attack. Now, ISIS, according to reports, is claiming responsibility for the attacks, but of course they always do. Anytime somebody does something crazy, ISIS usually jumps in and says, it was us. Well, no, there's no record of any sort of interaction between you two. Yes, maybe he was inspired by you and by some of the earlier attacks, but you had nothing to do with it. You're just coming in and claiming the glory, so-called glory, which is horrific because, of course, that's what ISIS wants. ISIS wants all the attention on them. Now, again, there was no evidence that ISIS planned the attack. Now, CNN also notes that the attacker, just like in the case of Belgium, was also once investigated for extremist links, but was not part of the current intelligence picture, according to Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May. Now, she also added that he was a peripheral figure. The case was historic. He was not part of the current intelligence picture. There was no prior intelligence of his intent or of the plot. Intensive investigations continue. So this is a story that is building. Okay, we are still building up the story. We're still trying to get the facts around and everything. And this right now is what we know. It's developing. Now, here's the thing that's important to know. He was already investigated. So what they found is, well, they didn't find anything linking him to any terror groups. So no ties to ISIS, no communications to ISIS, and no ideas that he would perpetrate this attack, despite having a prior record of violence. So very interesting. Now, if they had any sort of evidence that he was speaking with ISIS or coordinating with ISIS, that would actually make it easier to stop. It would make it harder for him to perpetrate these kinds of attacks. So, in a way, there's kind of a bright side. I don't think that we're going to see any sort of large-scale 9/11 types attacks anymore. That takes planning, communication, coordination. All that stuff can be tracked. Our governments have gotten pretty goddamn good at tracking these things. At tracking terrorists and tracking communications. Hell, they track our communications. So they've gotten pretty good at this. So that's why it's unlikely, I think, in my opinion, that we're not going to see any sort of massive 9/11 style attack. Now, there's a bad side to this as well, in that lone wolves attack like this are going to increase. And that's because they're very, very tough to predict and to put a stop to. It's much more difficult to stop these types of lone wolf attacks, especially when the perpetrator isn't using anything that's illegal. A knife, you can get a knife anywhere, and everybody's got a car. So this makes it very, very difficult to be able to stop these types of terror attacks. Now, despite such difficulties in preventing these attacks, British security officials have been pretty proud of their record of being able to stop some of these attacks. And they said, hey, look, we stopped, since 2013, we have stopped 13 of these other attacks. And they said, look, we were due. We were due. It was going to happen. We do our best. But again, these types of lone wolf attacks are very, very difficult to stop. So what they're doing on that front, for the most part, is working. But again, you can't stop 100% of all terrorist attacks. Now, what's important to note is that this guy was born in Britain. He was not a refugee. He was not from Syria. He was not from Lebanon or any of those other countries. He was British. He was born there. He was a national. The same thing with Belgium. So what that means is that maybe we should focus on how people in those countries get radicalized. Instead of worrying about the refugees coming in and being terrorists, maybe we should worry about how people in these Western countries are getting radicalized by extremist ideology. That would be something to look into. And then you look into that and you try to figure out how to stop it. How is it happening? What are the reasons for it? And you've got to find a logical answer to try to put an end to this radicalization. How do you stop people from being inspired by terrorism? We don't know the answer yet. So it goes deeper than some of the suggestions that, of course, I see coming from the right wing. To ban the Muslims, you got to ban them. Well, you got to ban them from coming over. What do you do with the ones that are already there, that were there in the first place? Again, he was British born. He was a British national. What, you start kicking people out because of their religion? Well, that gets really dicey. That gets really dicey really fast, and that's a dark road that you really don't want to go down. Profiling somebody based on their religion, dangerous, and definitely against freedom. So if you want to ban Muslims, if you want to kick them out, well, you're not solving the problem. You might actually be making the problem worse. So what do? I mean, yes, it's obvious there is a problem with fundamentalism, especially right now, fundamentalist Islam. Now, like all fundamentalist religion throughout our histories, there is conflict. There are acts of terror. This is right now, it's the Muslims' turn. And it's because there's a lot of people getting radicalized. There's a lot of instability in the Middle East. We can go through all the different causes of terror, Saudi Arabia, the United States helping spread Wahhabist terrorism, them being our greatest ally in the region, or one of our greatest allies in the region. We could talk about all that. And I think you could have a lot of conversations on that. But what we have to do is we have to talk about why people are being radicalized in the first place, and then put a stop to it. So this is a deep conversation that we have to really look at logically to try to put an end to this. Because if we really want to stop these attacks, we need to find out why it's happening, how people are being radicalized, why they're being radicalized, and then put an end to it. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.